everyone, my name is Nur Sabrina Binti Mohd Amirul Manja, matrix number 145763, and I'm from LSP401 group 15, and this will be my individual oral presentation. So, let's get started. Imagine yourself living in the 19th century where people deem life to be much more easier and do not require high maintenance for a living. To make it easier for you to picture, Englishmen in the 19th century sat at a dining table and they came up with this brilliant idea to create a new sport called wiff-raff, or what we know today as ping pong. So it seems that life back then was more lax, as they could just sit around and create new things. But comparison to today's time, where you sit at the table and the first thing that comes to mind is whether or not your job pays enough for you to support your family and bring food to the table every day. It does seem that life was much more easier back then, but I am here today to tell you how life was not easier a century ago. So my first point is that because of the exploitation of the lower class, you have never thought acts such as slavery and child labor were a real occurring business running in the current times. But during those days, in the past century, these acts were very common in most parts of the world. Taking slavery for example, in the 19th century, most men and women were enslaved and were forced to work on large agricultural plantations such as the cotton plantation and also maize or corn plantations. These slaves were to work as house servants and also field hands. Life of these enslaved men and women were brutal, as they were subject to repression, hard punishments, and strict social policing. They kept up with this exploitation because they do not have anywhere else to go outside of their owner's house. It is also because life depended on the mercy of these higher ranked people. The same exploitation also applies to children, as they were taken and were forced into child labor. This was most prominent during the time of the Industrial Revolution, where a lot of factories were built in big cities and they were lacking in manpower back then. These children were contracted to work like adults for up to 12 hours, not only in factories, but also in places like the mine quarry. They couldn't escape this fate, as they were forced to follow the instructions given to them by those from the higher class. The second point is that during the past century, there was an evident biasness in giving out education and also basic necessities. Education in today's world is seen as an important aspect in which should be given to everyone. This wasn't the case back then, as some people couldn't even dream of receiving basic education. This is because a century ago, only people from wealthy families could get access to education, as they seemed more likely to be able to create a better future. Education was hardly available for common people, as they were seen to be more suitable working with lower ranking jobs like those in agriculture that doesn't need an education pass to work in. Other than that, the color of your skin and your race also determines whether or not you can get education. This is because people of color like black people, Mexicans, and Asians were seen to be people that belong in the lower ranking class. Only white people and Englishmen were able to secure a place in the education circle. As for basic necessities, electricity too was only available to the wealthy families, while the common and the lower class families live off by what they have or what is given to them by these higher class people, be it money, food, shelter, even a job to supply for their living. Coming to my third point, life wasn't easy when war was just blowing up. The major differences between this century and the past is most evident in the engagement of wars that society has to face. Yes, we can see today that we do have some tensions between the first world countries such as America, China, Russia, and also North Korea. But it's not that much that could actually trigger a massive war among countries. Contrary to this, in the past century, we have engaged in two major wars that has gone down in history, which is World War I and World War II. We have also witnessed smaller scale wars which only happen in specific countries, like that of the American Civil War, American Revolutionary War, the Italian War, and also the Vietnam War. This was all because people were fighting over power and acted greedy beyond their line of power. Even wanting to achieve peace back then requires a big movement that involves big countries that were hard to communicate with back then. This shows how different it is from current times where we only require to send a letter or an email just by a touch of a button on the screen. My last point is that life a century ago wasn't equipped with the technology that we have today. The past century surely was filled with many breakthroughs where big names emerged with the invention of new contraptions. For example, the mobile phone, which was created in 1973 by Martin Cooper, a Motorola researcher and executive. This invention has come a long way from the first telephone created by Alexander Graham Bell back in 1876. It then took more time and research before that mobile phone evolved into what we know today as the smartphone. Not only that, by devices such as the computer, emailing apps, and Wi-Fi were absent back then. Even when they were invented later on, it wasn't as what we know them as today. The computer, for example, used to be the size of a fridge and can only access specific scripts that were programmed into it. This shows that even though these inventions were already present back then, they were still in the try and error phase where the inventors and researchers were still experimenting with the prototype of the products. To reach the technology that we have now, a lot of hard work and sacrifices were put into perfecting these inventions so that the future will be brighter. In conclusion, all the mistreatments, biasness, harsh realities that were faced, and the try and errors throughout the past century really helped in shaping a better today as humanity learns from their past mistakes. It has also shown that life was definitely not easier a century ago. Thank you.